Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to StoryForge Academy. It's great to have you here. Settle in, because today we're diving into one of the most essential foundations of storytelling: how to build a complete narrative using the 3-act structure. In this session, you'll learn how Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 work together as the engine of your story, how the inciting incident disrupts your character's world, how rising conflict in Act 2 shapes transformation, and how a powerful climax brings emotional and narrative resolution. If you're serious about writing stories, screenplays, or building worlds that truly move an audience, this session will give you tools you'll use for the rest of your creative life. And before we begin, if you're enjoying these lessons and want more in-depth storytelling training, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upcoming episode. Your support helps this academy grow and lets us keep creating high-quality content for you. All right, let's begin today's lesson. Rubin heard Maria's words, but they vanished into the clamor of his own mind. His entire being was captivated by the girl's familiar, haunting eyes. Her face, not with the clear lines of the old woman from his nightmares, but with the same strange sense of deep-rooted familiarity, made his heart pound with an unforeseen intensity. Was this also part of his lost memories? Did this profound feeling of home that had taken root within him come from here? He mused that this village, with its familiar alleys and ancient whispering trees, was more than just a business destination. This was the unsettling intersection of his nightmares with stark reality, and perhaps even the long-buried root of his own identity. With these thoughts swirling, Rubin tried to focus on the mission. He and Maria, playing the part of curious, observant tourists, entered every alley, remotely surveyed every abandoned house, and seemingly enjoyed the village's old architecture. But their gazes were sharpened, searching for potential escape routes, hidden observation points, and subtle security weaknesses. Maria meticulously matched the mental map in her mind with the actual paths. She pointed towards the high, ruined walls of the castle in the distance and said, "The main path to the castle runs along this dirt road, but we can also use these shortcuts and hills for better cover if necessary." Rubin nodded. He walked towards the old village mosque, a mosque with low, ancient minarets and weathered bricks. The feeling of familiarity reached its crescendo there. He entered the mosque's courtyard, touched the old, cool flagstones, and murmured words under his breath that he didn't know where they came from, the same Turkish words he instinctively understood. It seemed this language was not just comprehensible, but strangely, intrinsically natural to him, as if it had been dormant for years and was now reawakening, blooming within his consciousness. Throughout the day, they examined all the village entrances, estimated the number of households, and meticulously observed the residents' movements. Rubin noticed that the older part of the village, leaning towards the hills and the castle, was almost deserted, with most of its houses in ruins. This area, he concluded, could serve as the best, most discreet entry point for the team at night. He glanced at his hands. The faint burn marks, now more than ever, were unsettling testimony to the tangible reality of his nightmares. Here, in this remote village, not only was a hidden treasure waiting, but also the long-lost pieces of his own life's enigmatic puzzle. A shared secret in the night. That night, the small home of the elder was filled with the delightful, comforting aroma of local dishes. Rubin and Maria sat beside a simple wooden table adorned with a floral tablecloth. Just as they were enjoying their dinner, the room door opened, and a young woman with large, expressive eyes and long flowing black hair entered. She greeted them fluently in English and graciously joined their company. The girl, noticing Rubin and Maria's underlying, unspoken worries, decided to unburden herself of a secret she had hidden for years. In a quiet but firm voice, she said, "Everyone here fears the Ál Jinn. She is a real entity, not a mere figment of imagination. Many villagers have encountered her and suffered terrible, agonizing consequences. Rubin's face went pale, bleached of color. He looked at the girl with horror and asked, his voice barely a whisper, "What do you mean? What does she do?" The girl continued with a serious, somber tone. "The owl is always accompanied by several savage, formidable wolves. Wolves that fear neither humans nor dogs. They attack anyone who approaches their territory. 2 of the village shepherds encountered the owl last year. One died of fright on the spot, and the other became severely ill and couldn't speak for a long time." She took a deep breath, her voice softer now, as if recalling a truly horrifying scene. At dusk, as the air grew dark and the shepherds were bringing their flocks back to the village, suddenly the dogs started barking in terror, scattering from the sheep and fleeing into the darkness. The shepherds knew that if such a thing happened, the owl's presence there was certain and imminent. The girl lowered her voice further, but her words were still laden with palpable dread. The shepherds, out of fear, reacted to every shadow they saw, and in the twilight, every silhouette transformed into a monster. Gradually, several massive wolves appeared, but they weren't in an attacking stance. They seemed to be trained by the owl, waiting for her command to tear apart. And then, in that dusk, a dark figure emerged from among them, moving forward. It seemed to want to speak face to face with the shepherds, but the shepherds were so overwhelmed by fear and raw terror that this direct encounter was equivalent to convulsions, debilitating illness, and a fatal heart attack. One of them, a strong, burly man, collapsed on the spot from sheer, unadulterated terror and died. Rubin looked around horrified. He felt as if his nightmares had transformed into grim reality. A demonic creature roaming the night, harming people. His heart pounded faster, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This time, the girl's descriptions not only deepened the chilling fear within him, but also linked the vague, elusive memories of his nightmares with tangible, terrifyingly real details. A shadow from the past, Pakistan, Rubin's story to Maria. That night in the elder's home, after the unsettling, chilling stories of the owl woman had finally faded, Maria looked at Rubin with a questioning, probing gaze. "Rubin, despite all your worries, how did you ever agree to that Pakistan mission?" Rubin sighed, his gaze drifting to an unseen, distant point. Memories of that day, sharp and unwelcome, flickered before his eyes. Agreeing to it? It was Roland's idea, after all. That day, after our meeting at Roland's office, Anna and I were walking downtown. Anna was pregnant, and we were dreaming vividly about our child's future. I don't know why, but that day, her attention was glued to a jewelry store window. She looked at the pieces inside with such fascination, her voice filled with awe as she spoke about how beautiful they were. She was completely captivated by a diamond that cost 50,000 euros. She couldn't tear her eyes away. It was like that diamond had put her under a powerful, irresistible spell. His voice softened, as if reliving the precise moment. I told Anna, one phone call, if I tell them I'm ready for a trip. And you can have that diamond. Anna looked at me, surprised, her eyes wide. What kind of trip? She asked. I said, it's like all the other trips, but with one small difference. Part of this journey is going to be illegal. If I get caught at the border, I'll definitely be detained for a while. But Salvador's connections will sort that out. Quickly and efficiently, Anna asked, is there anything else to be afraid of besides that? I told her this wasn't a buying and selling mission. It was just a meeting for a sample collection. I told her an expert was coming with us. They'd do the real dangerous work. Rubin paused, his eyes meeting Maria's, a shared understanding passing between them. Anna looked at that diamond again, her gaze still fixed, and said, can I really have it? Right then, I called Salvador on my phone. I asked, Salvador, would Roland be willing to buy a small gift for Anna? Salvador asked, What's the story? I put him on speaker. Anna spoke to Salvador about the diamond with so much excitement and eagerness, her voice bubbling with anticipation. Salvador said, "Please wait a moment, while I contact Roland." He explained that Roland was the investor in this venture, and he'd have to pay this amount for such a dangerous mission. About 10 minutes later, Salvador called back. "Rubin, check your online bank account." Just then, 50,000 euros had been deposited into my account. The diamond was bought for Anna, and I became irrevocably committed to Roland until the end of that trip. Preparations for the trip. Meeting Dr. Allison White. Rubin continued, his voice gaining a more reflective tone. After that, the preparations started in earnest. Roland immediately set about convincing the mummy expert to join the trip. A few days later, Victor and I met her at Düsseldorf. Airport, Dr. Allison White. She was around 35, with a poised, elegant demeanor and a refined appearance that immediately spoke of intelligence and quiet confidence. Her brownish blonde hair was neatly tied back, and she had piercing green eyes that reflected a deep, insatiable curiosity. Dr. White was one of the few leading mummy specialists in the world, renowned for her groundbreaking research and uncanny ability to precisely date and authenticate rare finds. Despite the ethical ambiguities surrounding this mission, she couldn't resist the irresistible temptation to examine an undiscovered, Achaemenid mummy, a temptation that even overcame her instinct for caution. She was also fluent in Persian, which Roland considered a great advantage, a crucial asset for the mission. The road to the border, an uncertain journey. The three of us, me, Victor, and Dr. White, departed from Düsseldorf for Tehran. The flight was relatively smooth, but an underlying current of tension was palpable between us. I was often quiet, my mind consumed by thoughts of Anna, who was pregnant and left behind in Germany, and the unborn child we eagerly awaited. Victor, on the other hand, was energetic and eager, his enthusiasm a sharp contrast to my internal turmoil. He answered Dr. White's questions about the operation, though he carefully skirted the illegal details, speaking in hushed tones. Dr. White, despite her outward composure, didn't hide her professional curiosity, asking precise questions about the mummy's source and discovery conditions, which sometimes made it difficult for Victor and me to answer with complete honesty. After arriving in Tehran, we moved quickly and discreetly with the help of one of Salvador's contacts, heading east towards a small border town near the Pakistani border. The land journey was long and exhausting. The roads were bumpy, and the landscape was dry and desert-like. The closer we got to the border, the more the sense of insecurity in entering an unknown, dangerous territory grew, pressing down on us like a physical weight. Poisoning at the hotel, an ambush in the border town. We checked into a modest hotel in the border town. This was our last stop before the illegal border crossing in the darkness of the night. The next day, the border smugglers were supposed to take us into Pakistan. That evening, we had dinner at the hotel's small restaurant. Dr. White and Victor, weary from the journey, ordered simple meals and seemed eager to rest to prepare themselves for the encounter with the mummy. I also tried to maintain my composure, but the anxiety of the upcoming trip gnawed at me relentlessly. But that very night, in the hotel room, something terrible happened. Dr. Allison White and Victor were poisoned. This was orchestrated by the Pakistani intermediaries who were cooperating with the smugglers and the mummies. Discoverers, they knew very well that the presence of a mummy specialist would ruin their plan to sell a fake mummy. Furthermore, they didn't want any other witnesses present with me who could later recall the details. The poisoning was done subtly, through water or a drink sent to their room. It was a slow-acting, temporary substance that caused severe nausea, dizziness, extreme weakness, and a complete inability to move or focus, but it wasn't lethal. The goal was simply to incapacitate them and remove them from the mission at the most critical moment. The next morning, I anxiously went to Dr. White and Victor's room. Both were severely ill, pale, and unable to move. It was clear they couldn't even take a few steps, let alone cross the border. This incident left me alone and in an emergency situation. Rubin's unwilling new role. Rubin continued. I immediately called Roland and explained the situation. Roland was shocked for a moment after hearing about the poisoning, but he quickly started thinking of a solution. He couldn't afford to lose that €25 million deal. He told me, "All right, Rubin, the plans have changed. We can't risk waiting to send a new expert now. You'll have to go in their place." I asked in horror, "Me? But I have no expertise in mummies. How can I authenticate it?" Roland, in a firm tone that left no room for argument, replied, "You don't need to authenticate it. The intermediaries don't want anyone too involved. You just need to be present in front of them. You need to be next to the mummy and see that the sample collection takes place. The photos taken of the mummy and the sample we send must be sent to the experts in Germany so they can give their final opinion based on the images and the sample. Your presence as a live, trusted witness is enough for them to be sure such a mummy exists, and it's not a scam. You did this for me, and now you have to see it through to the end." Rubin shook his head, his gaze somber. And that's how, for that diamond, I found myself in an unimaginable bind. Alone in a hostile and illegal environment with a heavy, Storytelling Masterclass, an analysis of conflict, mystery, and pacing. Good afternoon, class. Today we are going to dive into a richly detailed passage that effectively utilizes internal and external conflict, setting as a character, and gradual revelation to drive narrative momentum. This text, detailing Rubin and Maria's mission alongside Rubin's personal backstory, offers excellent material for understanding how to weave character arc into a suspense-driven plot, and the power of setting and internal conflict. The passage immediately establishes the village not just as a location, but as an external manifestation of Rubin's internal crisis. Rubin's sensory experience, the familiar, haunting eyes, the strange sense of deep-rooted familiarity, the profound feeling of home, creates an immediate and compelling mystery. The phrase, "This was the unsettling intersection of his nightmares with stark reality, and perhaps even the long-buried root of his own identity," is a masterstroke. It explicitly tells the reader the stakes are not just professional, the mission, but existential, his identity. This deepens the character's motivation far beyond a simple treasure hunt. Notice how the author uses sensory detail and action to reveal this conflict. Rubin's visit to the mosque, touching the cool flagstones, and the instinctive understanding of Turkish words, is a scene of quiet yet powerful revelation. It is a moment of epiphany that provides the first concrete clue about his past, tying his subconscious nightmares to a tangible cultural reality. This is far more effective than an internal monologue simply stating, "I wonder where I learned Turkish." The physical setting, particularly the old ruined part of the village, is then strategically repurposed as the best, most discreet entry point, perfectly merging the plot. Requirements, a secret entry with the atmospheric tension, the abandoned, mysterious ruins. 2. Escalation of external conflict and folklore. The narrative then shifts to the evening, employing a classic device, the local legend as a harbinger of danger. The introduction of the young woman and the story of the Ál Jinn serves several critical functions. First, it is a brilliant mechanism for raising the stakes and validating Rubin's nightmares. The Ál Jinn is not a ghost but a real entity, accompanied by savage, formidable wolves. This provides the supernatural element of Rubin's fears with a terrifyingly real-world counterpoint. The description of the shepherd's encounter, the dogs scattering in terror, the figure emerging from the wolves, and the man dying from sheer, unadulterated terror, is a masterful piece of horror writing, rich in imagery and psychological dread. It moves Rubin's internal fear from a vague neurosis to a justified, immediate threat. Second, the girl's narrative acts as a foreshadowing device, suggesting that the team's mission will involve more than just human adversaries and security systems. It will involve an element of primal, overwhelming fear, perhaps even the supernatural. How? The deepening character arc, backstory, and moral ambiguity. The final longest section detailing Rubin's past, the conversation with Maria about the Pakistan mission is crucial for establishing his moral compass and core motivations. The structure here is highly effective, using an external prompt. How did you ever agree to that Pakistan mission? To unlock a vivid emotional memory, the entire sequence is framed by the $50,000 diamond. This single object becomes a powerful symbol of Rubin's temptation and his devotion to his pregnant wife, Anna. The author cleverly uses Anna's irresistible spell and eagerness for the diamond to justify Rubin's morally compromised decision. This single act, calling Salvador and getting the money, instantly makes his commitment irrevocably committed to Roland, locking him into the high-stakes illegal mission. This allows the reader to understand, yet perhaps not entirely forgive, his choice, creating a complex, relatable protagonist caught in a trap of his own making. The subsequent introduction of Dr. Allison White establishes the original, safer plan, making the subsequent events, the poisoning, all the more shocking. The slow, methodical pace of the journey contrasts sharply with the sudden, violent act of the poisoning. IV. Pacing and the climax of the backstory. The sequence in the border town is the climax of the backstory. The poisoning of Dr. White and Victor is a classic narrative twist that achieves maximum impact. Elimination of witnesses. It clears the board, isolating Rubin. Removal of the expert. It creates a functional problem for the mission. Forced transformation. It forces Roland to put Rubin into an unimaginable bind. Roland's final, cold-blooded command, "You'll have to go in their place," effectively completes Rubin's character transformation from an intermediary to the unwilling, vulnerable central player in an illegal operation. The mission is no longer about supporting an expert. It is about Rubin's survival and his forced performance as an expert, driven only by the $50,000 debt. This revelation successfully links the current, high-stakes mission in the village back to the high-stakes risk he took for the diamond, cementing the tragic irony of his situation. In conclusion, this passage excels by integrating setting and identity. The village mirrors Rubin's internal conflict, layering conflict. The mission risk is compounded by the supernatural threat of the Ál Jinn. Using a single symbol, the diamond, it clearly and quickly establishes the stakes and moral motivation for Rubin's past choices, employing effective pacing. The slow build-up of the journey is shattered by the sudden, strategic violence of the poisoning, leading to a profound change in the protagonist's role. The author is deftly setting the stage for a narrative where the Good afternoon, everyone. Settle in, take a breath, and loosen your shoulders. Today we're walking into the beating heart of narrative design. Character may be the soul of a story. Theme may be its philosophy. But plot is the circulatory system, the grand architecture that carries everything forward. And within modern storytelling, no structure has proven more reliable, more adaptable, and more strangely intuitive than the 3-act structure. Think of today's session as examining the skeleton of narrative. Clean, essential, and full of purpose. And because abstract theory always feels lonely, we'll anchor everything in the detailed case study you've been working with. Rubin's mystery-driven journey, the haunted village, the legend of the Ál Jinn, and the explosive Pakistan backstory. This is not a theory class. This is engineering. Let's walk through it together. clearly, deeply, and with the curiosity of someone taking apart a clock to understand time itself. Act 1. The introduction and the igniting spark. Every narrative begins with equilibrium, an ordinary world, even if that ordinary world is strange, tense, or fragile. What matters is that the protagonist understands this world and lives within it without yet being transformed. Rubin's ordinary world is anything but peaceful, yet it is familiar to him. He is an operative, a professional, a man accustomed to missions, secrecy, and danger. The village he enters in the present-day storyline appears simply as another assignment, but the moment his senses begin reacting, familiar, haunting eyes, deep-rooted familiarity, a sudden sense of home, that equilibrium trembles. Strong Act 1s don't exist to dump exposition. They exist to create a promise, a question, a tension in the air. The passage does this beautifully. Rubin is not merely walking through a mission. He is walking through a memory he does not fully own, and that is the spark. A narrative always needs a doorway, the moment when the character's world is disrupted. In Rubin's case, that moment arrives twice, because his story carries both an external and internal engine. The internal inciting incident occurs in the mosque. He touches the cool flagstones. Unfamiliar words in Turkish rise instinctively to his lips. This is more than atmosphere. It confirms what he feared. The nightmare and the real world are merging. His subconscious is bleeding into reality. The external inciting incident is the arrival of the young woman with her tale of the Ál Jinn, a creature not symbolic but possibly real, accompanied by wolves and a reputation carved in terror. The legend is not campfire storytelling. It is a warning, and Rubin recognizes the outline of his nightmare inside it. Act 1 ends when the protagonist can no longer back away. Rubin cannot unknow the familiarity of the village or unfeel the terror coursing through him when he hears the legend. And so the story shifts into Act 2, the realm of pressure. Act 2, conflict, pressure, and crisis. If Act 1 is the skin of the story, Act 2 is the muscle. This is the part students often struggle with, not because it is difficult, but because it demands momentum. There is no comfort here, no stability, only rising tension, escalating stakes, shifting alliances, secrets revealed, and the tightening of screws around the protagonist's psyche. Rubin's Act 2 begins with the deceptively simple question from Maria. How did you ever agree to that Pakistan mission? Questions like this are narrative trapdoors. They drop the story into memory, but not for the sake of nostalgia. A flashback must always redefine the present, tightening the emotional bonds between past mistake and current danger. Rubin's backstory is not a digression. It is the backbone of why he is compromised now. We learn of the diamond, $50,000 worth of temptation, and we learn of the emotional pressure. His pregnant wife, Anna, full of excitement and hope. Love becomes vulnerability. Vulnerability becomes debt, and debt becomes obligation. This is Act 2 at its best. The protagonist making a choice that feels right at the time, but carries a hidden cost that will poison everything later. Rubin calls Salvador. The money is transferred. The moment is irreversible. This is the midpoint, the point of no return. Midpoints are where the story's mirror cracks, where the protagonist sees the first glimpse of the trap closing, and then the trap snaps shut. The poisoning of Dr. White and Victor is a textbook escalation. First, it removes the experts who were meant to handle the technical aspect. Second, it isolates Rubin in an illegal, hostile environment. Third, it forces Roland to reveal his cold, brutal nature. Fourth, it pushes Rubin from observer to unwilling participant. Roland's command, "You'll have to go in their place," is the crisis point of the backstory. It defines Rubin's relationship to danger, fear, and obligation all the way into the present-day storyline. Act 2 always ends in crisis. A crisis is not the same as a climax. A crisis is a breaking point. The protagonist's old strategies collapse. Their identity splinters. Rubin realizes that his life is no longer governed by his choices, but by debts, emotional, financial, existential. And so Act 2 closes with Rubin, carrying a weight that bleeds into the current mission in the village. His fear of the Ál Jinn is not abstract. It's connected to guilt, debt, trauma, and the gnawing question of who he once was. Act 3. Climax and the final shape of the story. Act 3 is not simply where things happen. It is where the emotional logic of the narrative completes its orbit. Everything planted in Act 1 and twisted in Act 2 returns, not as a repetition, but as a transformation. A climax is only powerful when it forces the protagonist to confront both halves of their story, the external threat and the internal truth. Rubin's Act 3 begins with clarity. The team prepares to infiltrate the ruined section of the village, but Rubin prepares for something deeper, the confrontation with his past. A climax is always built on 2 tracks. The external confrontation, physical, urgent, dangerous. The internal confrontation, psychological, moral, existential. In this story, both tracks converge. At the ruins near the castle, where the Ál Jinn is rumored to roam and where Rubin's nightmares seem to originate. For a climax to work, the protagonist must act with full awareness. They must make a choice that defines them. Rubin's choice may involve facing the Ál Jinn instead of running, using the Turkish language hidden in him, choosing honesty over fear, choosing identity over secrecy, choosing redemption over avoidance. A climax should be difficult, painful, and clarifying. And after the storm, the narrative must settle. A resolution is not an epilogue. It is the emotional balancing of the story. Rubin may discover the truth about his burn marks. He may confront Roland about the past. He may find clarity about who he once was, or who he now chooses to be. He may decide to break free from the criminal web. He may begin a process of healing. Even if the world remains broken, the character must find new equilibrium. This is the purpose of Act 3, to give the audience the final shape of the story. Not a perfect shape, but an earned one. Interpreting the 3-act structure through Rubin's story. To bring this all together, let's lay the 3 acts over Rubin's journey. Act I creates the mystery. Why is this village familiar? What links Rubin to the legend? Why are his senses reacting? Act 2 deepens the wound. The Pakistan mission, the weight of the diamond, the poisoning. The moment Rubin becomes a compromised operative. Act 3 delivers the confrontation. Rubin facing the Ál Jinn, the treasure, and his forgotten identity. This is not just structure. This is emotional architecture. Plot is never separate from character. It is the shadow cast by character. When the inner and outer conflicts merge, the story moves from interesting to unforgettable. A miniature fiction example, The Watchmaker. To keep things tactile, let's return briefly to the short watchmaker example. Act 1 introduces a broken watch that moves backward 1 minute every midnight. Act 2 escalates the temptation until Lila unintentionally erases the last conversation with her mother. Act 3 forces her to break the watch deliberately, sacrificing power for truth. This small story mirrors the same engine. Disruption, escalation, transformation. The scale changes, the emotional temperature changes, the theme changes, but the gravitational pull remains the same. The 3-act structure is a rhythm, one your audience feels in their bones, even when they've never studied it. Closing thoughts. Storytelling is the art of designing change. Structure isn't a cage. It's a shape, a current, a gravitational pull that lets characters fall, break, learn, and rebuild. Rubin's story, rich with danger, memory, guilt, supernatural dread, and self-discovery, is a perfect example of how the 3-act structure can support a narrative both intimate and epic. The next time you outline a story, remember this. Act 1 is the promise. Act 2 is the wound. Act 3 is the reckoning. Now take this architecture and design your own. A protagonist, A disruption. A pressure point. A crisis. A revelation. A final choice. Every story is a journey. Your job is to build the road.